Hello, everyone. We are reading chapter 18. I'm going to put them in two videos again because it seems to only work that way. So this will be chapter 18. Here, I'll read this quote. This was from when he was looking for Gobi. I knew I had the heart for the fight. I knew my desire to find Gobi was as strong as any desire I'd ever had within me. Whatever it took, I knew I wasn't going to rest until there was nowhere left to search. Okay. Sorry, it's a little dark in here. Okay, chapter 18. There were a couple more pictures in chapter 17. Just wanted to show you Gobi. It says Gobi's sports a new sweater. There were some pictures of him laying on the couch. I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but alrighty, chapter 18. Dion spent the rest of the morning doing interviews by phone while Gobi slept on the bed. Newspapers and news sites back in Britain and America had been asking him for updates all along, but Dion had found it difficult to talk to them with Gobi missing. What could he say beyond the note on the crowdfunding site? He didn't know any more about how long she had been missing or how she had gotten loose or where she was. Having to talk about that over and over again would have been depressing for him and for all the people rooting for him and Gobi. Dion hadn't wanted that. But now things were different. Now he and Gobi were together again. Now he could happily tell the whole story about coming back to China, about searching and about finding her. He could relax and smile and talk about how they could now move forward with their plan to bring Gobi back to Scotland with him. Eventually, Gobi woke up. She stretched and yawned and hopped out of his lap and padded over to the door. She scratched at the door with one paw, not hard, but more to get Dion's attention. Then she whined. Uh-oh. Dion knew what that meant. She needed to relieve herself. But this wasn't the museum from the storm. There weren't any fake trees right outside the door. Still, he knew she needed to go, and he couldn't make her go in here. That wasn't fair to Gobi or to the house cleaners. Which meant he had to take her outside the room at least. Dion thought the best bet was to go down to the basement parking lot again. That was still a little gross, but at least it wasn't in the hall or the room or the lobby. It also meant he didn't have to get past the guards again, but he was still worried. What if the cleaning lady had told someone about Gobi being in his room? Stepping over to the door, Dion patted Gobi on the head. I know, girl, he told her. I know. He took a deep breath, then cracked the door open. Nobody else was out in the hall. Okay, let's go, he told her, and stepped out. She quickly followed. He had considered hiding her in the bag again, but that had taken a lot of effort the first time. He didn't think it'd be worth it for such a quick trip. They trotted over to the elevator, and Dion pushed the down button. The whole time they were waiting, he kept glancing around. What would he do if he saw someone else come out in the hall? He couldn't hide Gobi then. If the guest was a foreigner like him, they may not mind. In fact, the guest might even know who he was and who Gobi was. But if that guest were Chinese, Dion would be in trouble. There was no way they would be happy about discovering that a dog was sharing their floor. Fortunately, no one else emerged. The elevator dinged, and when it finally opened, the car was empty. Dion hurried in with Gobi beside him. He pressed the button for the parking lot, and the doors slid shut. No one else got on, and they reached the parking lot without any problem. Not ideal, I know, Dion told Gobi as they walked across it, but I hope it's okay for now. She didn't complain, at least. They headed for the exit in the same patch of bushes as before. Again, Dion turned his back to give Gobi some privacy. He heard the elevator ding and glanced that way. It opened and two men in dark suits came out. Dion worried they might be headed his way, but instead they turned and got into a gray sedan. Time to go, Gobi, he urged. If the car came this way, the men would see her for sure. Fortunately, when he glanced over his shoulder, Gobi had finished. She kicked some dirt back over what she'd left and then trotted to his side, her tail wagging. Dion led her away from the exit, but not straight toward the elevator. Instead, he circled around so the gray sedan wouldn't see them as it passed. But as they were walking, he heard the elevator again. This time, only one man exited, but Dion's heart sank. It was a security guard, and the man stationed himself in front of the elevator, arms crossed. Now what were they going to do? Dion had no idea how long the security guard planned to stand there. It could be all day, or he might start walking around the parking lot to make sure the cars were safe and no one had snuck in from outside. Either way, they would get caught. Dion thought about calling Richard for help. Maybe he could come down and distract the security guard so Dion could sneak Gobi back onto the elevator. But there weren't any places to hide here, really. The guard would probably see them, and then all of them would be in trouble. Finally, Dion decided the best option was the direct one. "Come on, Gobi," he said, and headed straight for the elevator. The security guard watched him approach. The man straightened and nodded at Dion, but then he spotted Gobi and held up his hand for him to stop. Dion did stop just a few feet from the man, and Gobi stopped at his side as always. "We're just heading back up to our room," he explained. Dion had no idea if the guard understood him, so he pulled out his room key and held that up. Then he pointed at the elevator. The guard pointed at Gobi and shook his head. That was exactly what Dion had been afraid of. He frowned. What could he do now? Beside him, Gobi cocked her head to one side. It didn't look like she had many answers either. Then Dion remembered the maid. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out another 100 yuan note and held it up. Then he waved it toward the elevator. The guard considered that for a moment. Finally, he nodded. Dion handed him the money, and the guard stepped aside to let them pass. Both of them. "Well, that was lucky," Dion said after the elevator door had closed behind them, and he and Gobi were alone. He was still worried, though. What if the guard told the hotel manager about Gobi? What if he told someone else? What if the maid told someone? The more people who knew he had Gobi there, the more likely it was someone would come to disturb them. Dion hoped that Luzin would find a place for them soon. Gobi didn't know exactly what was going on, but she wasn't worried. The tall man had taken her to this funny house with all the floors and moving box and the basement filled with cars. It was a strange place, but nice. They had a room that was bigger than the tent they had shared with the other runners. They had a bathroom, they had food and water, and a comfy couch and a comfy bed. And they were together, so Gobi was happy. Then she heard someone outside. There were footsteps, followed by a knock on the door. Gobi sniffed. She knew that scent. She started barking. "Go away," she said. The knock on the door surprised Dion, but he was more startled when Gobi started barking. He'd never heard her do that before. "Shh," he warned her, and she stopped at once. But if anyone else heard her, it was already too late. Dion crossed to the door and looked through the peephole. Two men stood outside. One of them was Nurali's husband. What do they want, Dion thought, and how had they even found him? There was only one way out of the room, and that was the door between Dion and the men. And the men had heard her barking, so Dion couldn't pretend they weren't here. He pulled out his phone and pulled up Richard's number and texted, "Come to my room immediately." The other man outside the door was raising his hand to knock again. Dion didn't want to risk any other guests wondering what all the noise was about and hearing Gobi as well, so he opened the door just enough to peer out. "Hello?" he said. He tried to smile and look relaxed, but he wasn't sure he was very convincing. Nurali's husband just stared at him. "Can we come in?" For a second, Dion considered saying no and slamming the door, but he knew he couldn't do that, and he was curious to know what they wanted. "Okay," Dion said finally, and stepped back to let them enter. Dion shut the door once the men were inside. He turned to find them standing over Gobi, staring down at her. She didn't seem frightened, and she wasn't barking anymore. Someone knocked on the door, and Dion jumped, but when he checked, he felt better. It was Richard. "Hey, man, what do you need?" Richard asked as Dion opened the door again. Yes, mate," Dion mumbled. He swung the door all the way open so Richard could see into the room. "Didn't you want to come and get some of these posters to take home as souvenirs?" he asked. It was a weak excuse, and he knew it, and he was sure Nurali's husband thought it was odd that Richard had just turned up. Fortunately, Richard saw what was happening and played along. "Oh, yeah, right," he agreed. He nodded to Nurali's husband and his silent friend. "What's up?" He didn't enter the room, though. There wasn't enough space for all of them. Dion felt a lot better now that Richard was here. His friend was a Marine veteran, after all. More importantly, he could speak Chinese, so he could help get to the bottom of this. Dion stepped between the two men and picked up Gobi. She licked his face as he held her and turned to face the men. Nurali's husband finally fired off a long sentence in rapid Chinese. Dion didn't understand him, of course, but then the other man spoke and waited for the translation. Nurali and her husband had seen all the press coverage Gobi had been getting and were worried Dion would blame them for her escape. That part Dion certainly understood. He nodded. "All I want to do is get Gobi out of here and get home," he promised them. "I'm not interested in trying to find out how she escaped, and I'm not interested in finding someone to blame," he continued. "As far as I'm concerned, it was just an accident, and it's all fine now." He stared back at the men. It's in all our interest to keep it that way too, isn't it?" Finally, Nurali's husband nodded. He shouldered past Dion and Gobi, and his friend followed. Richard shifted from the doorway to let them pass. Dion watched them head to the elevator. He didn't relax until it arrived and taken them away. Then he finally slumped against the wall. Richard shook his head. "That was fun," he said. Dion knew his friend meant the exact opposite, and he agreed. No, it had not been fun at all, but hopefully that was the last they would see of those two. Go listen to Chapter 19.